Demery delivers. Gullett swings, hits a fly ball back to the left field. Whitney says going back, looking up, and it's gone, a home run! Don Gullett with a 2-run home run to left field off of Larry Demery, and the place has gone bananas.
The devastating truth about Don Gullett came back into focus when the former World Series star died at 73 on February 14, 2024. He was a Cincinnati Reds and New York Yankees pitcher. He won 3 straight World Series titles from 1975 through 1977. Fans once called him a future Hall of Famer. He threw his last major league pitch at only 27. I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. How did a pitcher with 91 wins by age 25, blazing speed, and Sandy Koufax comparisons lose his career so fast? Before we follow how it all fell apart, use the hype feature and give this video some hype so more fans can hear Don's full story. The answer is not one sudden injury. It is a chain of warning signs, tough choices, and damaging events that built on each other for years, quietly stacking up behind every win and every championship. To understand it, we have to go back to the beginning, long before the Reds ever put him on a mound, and long before anyone in baseball had heard the name Don Gullett at all. Think about how rare it is for any young player to draw comparisons to one of the greatest pitchers who ever lived. Sandy Koufax retired at the peak of his own powers because of arm trouble, and even that comparison carried a strange kind of warning inside it that nobody wanted to notice at the time. People were praising Gullett's power and his poise, and rightly so. But the comparison to Koufax was not only about talent, it was also, without anyone fully saying it out loud, a comparison to a pitcher whose career had also ended earlier than it should have because of his arm. Nobody treated that part of the comparison as a warning back then. Everyone was too busy admiring the fastball. Don Gullett grew up on hard work and raw talent. Scouts believed he could throw as hard as any young pitcher in the country. Sparky Anderson, the Hall of Fame manager who guided the Big Red Machine, believed Gullett could pitch until at least age 35. Anderson thought he could win at least 250 games if his body stayed healthy. That was not a small prediction. It placed Gullett in the same conversation as the greatest left-handed pitchers of all time. By the time Gullett celebrated his 25th birthday, he had 91 major league wins. That number was ahead of where Warren Spahn, Whitey Ford, and Sandy Koufax stood at the same age. 3 names that belong among the very best pitchers baseball has ever produced. Those 3 names belong among the best left-handers in baseball history. Full stop, no argument needed. Beating their pace by 25 was a massive achievement. Gullett stood 6 feet tall and weighed 190 pounds. He had the kind of build that could handle heavy innings. His fastball overpowered hitters, and writers kept comparing him to Koufax because of the way he combined power and control. It was a rare pairing. Plenty of young pitchers can throw hard. Far fewer can throw hard while also locating pitches with the kind of precision that keeps hitters guessing and off balance, start after start. But strength can hide danger. A pitcher can look unstoppable on the outside, while damage builds on the inside. Gullett's motion put constant stress on his shoulder, and that stress did not show up right away in his stat line. Wins piled up. Championships piled up. Reporters wrote glowing stories about his future, and teammates trusted him to carry big innings in big games. Yet warning signs kept appearing years before his final tier, and most people did not see them as part of one larger pattern. Each single problem looked small enough to shrug off on its own. A sore neck here, a tired shoulder there. None of it looked like the beginning of the end. His story did not have to end early, but the pieces that would eventually break him were already in motion during his very best seasons, quietly building while the wins kept coming. Long before any of that, Gullett was a farm kid in Kentucky, learning what hard labor felt like. He was born on January 6, 1951, in rural Greenup County. He was the 6th of 8 children. His family worked the land, and young Don spent summers doing manual farm work, including lifting heavy bales of hay. That labor built real strength in his arms and back, years before any coach ever trained him. His younger brother William also carried real athletic ability. William went on to spend a season playing minor league baseball in the Detroit Tigers organization, though his path never reached the majors the way Don's eventually would. Athletic talent clearly ran through the Gullett family, but Don's gift stood out even among relatives who could also play at a high level. It was the kind of talent that small Kentucky towns do not see very often, the kind that gets people driving long distances just to watch a teenager pitch on a Friday night. At school, he was not just a baseball player, he was a 3-sport star. He earned all-state recognition in baseball, baseball, football, and basketball. In one football game, he scored an incredible 72 points. He rushed for 11 touchdowns and kicked 6 extra points himself. In one basketball game, he scored 47 points. Numbers like that are rare for any high school athlete in any sport. Baseball was where he truly stood out. He pitched on his high school's varsity team while he was still in the 8th grade. That alone tells you how far ahead of his age group he was. He finished his high school career with a record of about 30 wins and only 4 losses. His most famous outing was a perfect game where he struck out 20 of the 21 batters he faced. A performance like that gets noticed fast, and it did. Scout Gene Bennett found him and believed in his arm. The Cincinnati Reds picked Gullett 14th overall in the 1969 draft. Bennett signed him for a $25,000 bonus, a serious sum of money for a farm family in rural Kentucky at that time. Around that same time, Gullett married his high school sweetheart, Kathy Holcomb. His path to the majors moved so quickly that Kathy stayed behind in Kentucky to finish high school while he left for spring training in Florida. Think about how strange that must have felt. He was a married teenager, leaving his home state for the first time, stepping straight into a professional clubhouse full of grown men with years of experience. He was barely out of his teenage years, and he was already stepping into professional baseball with almost no transition period at all. Up to this point in his life, Gullett had rarely met a physical limit he could not push past. Farm work built his body. High school sports proved his talent. Professional scouts confirmed what everyone already suspected. But professional baseball works differently than high school ball. The workload is heavier, the pressure is higher, and the human body does not always get the time it needs to catch up. Gullett was about to find that out in a hurry. His stay in the minor leagues barely counted as a stay at all. He made just 11 starts for the Sioux Falls Packers. He went 7-2 with a 1.96 ERA. Those numbers were strong enough that the Reds did not see a reason to wait. By spring of 1970, Gullett had a spot on Cincinnati's opening day roster. He was only 19 years old. He made his major league debut on April 10, 1970. The bases were loaded with 2 outs, and the Reds needed him to get out of trouble immediately. He retired Tito Fuentes and escaped the jam in his very first appearance. That kind of pressure moment would have rattled a lot of rookies. It did not rattle him. Gullett spent his rookie year mostly in the bullpen. He finished with a 5.2 record and a 2.43 ERA. He picked up 6 saves across 44 appearances. In the World Series that year, he allowed just 1 earned run. For a 19-year-old, this was an outstanding debut season by almost any measure. Most teenagers who reach the majors spend that first year simply trying to survive against grown men who have been hitting professional pitching for years. Gullett did not just survive. He thrived, and he did it in high-pressure relief situations where a single mistake could cost his team a game. That kind of composure at such a young age is part of why so many people around the sport believed his ceiling was almost limitless. The next year, Sparky Anderson made an unusual decision. He put the 20-year-old Gullett on a strict 100-pitch limit. This was one of the earliest known examples of a formal pitch count in baseball history. Think about what that tells us. The Reds already understood, at least on some level, that this young arm needed extra protection. That instinct did not come from nowhere. It came from watching how hard Gullett threw and worrying about what that effort might cost him over time. Even with that limit, Gullett moved into a full-time starting role and thrived. He won 16 games and led the National League with a .727 winning percentage. He worked over 217 innings that season and struck out 107 batters, a huge jump in workload from his rookie year spent mostly in relief. That kind of leap, from a bullpen arm to a workhorse starter in a single offseason, would raise real concerns for any modern training staff watching a 20-year-old take on that much added strain. On paper, everything looked perfect. A teenager had become a frontline starter with elite results. But we have to ask an honest question here. Why did a pitcher this young already need a specially designed workload plan? The answer is not that the pitch count caused any injury. It did not. The answer is that his body was already being treated as fragile cargo, even while it was producing historic numbers. Coaches do not build careful limits around arms they consider unbreakable. They build them around arms they already suspect are fragile. In 1972, Gullett's health took its first real hit. He came down with a serious case of hepatitis. The illness drained his strength and slowed his fastball. He finished that season 9-10. It was the only losing season of his entire professional career. Despite the setback, he pushed through it and returned to pitch in the 1972 World Series against Oakland. Instead of easing up after the illness, Gullett adapted. By 1974, he had added a forkball to his arsenal, a pitch with a sharp downward break. Combined with his fastball, curveball, and hard slider, it gave him 4 dangerous weapons. This was a smart, mature adjustment for a pitcher still in his early 20s. Instead of relying only on pure velocity, he was learning to set up hitters with movement and deception. In some ways, it made him an even more complete pitcher than he had been as a pure power arm. The move paid off almost immediately. In July of 1974, he earned National League Player of the Month honors. He went 6-1 that month with a tiny 1.83 ERA, numbers that showed just how effective his expanded arsenal had become. It is worth pausing here to notice something important. A pitcher who is only relying on velocity often has fewer ways to survive when his body will not cooperate. A pitcher with 4 effective pitches has more tools to manage pain, fatigue, or reduced strength on a given day. Gullett's development of the forkball gave him exactly that kind of safety net, even though nobody knew yet how much he would eventually need it. During this same stretch, Gullett found himself connected to 2 remarkable pieces of baseball history. In 1972, he gave up Hank Aaron's 660th career home run. The next year, he gave up Willie Mays' 660th and final career home run. These were brief moments in a long career, but they placed Gullett's name next to 2 of the greatest hitters the sport has ever seen. Look back at how his early seasons stacked up. In 1970, his rookie year, he threw 77 innings out of the bullpen with 76 strikeouts. In 1971, his first year as a full-time starter, that number jumped to over 217 innings. In 1972, the year hepatitis struck him down, his innings dropped to 134 as his body struggled just to get through a start. Each of those seasons asked something different of his arm, and each one added its own layer of wear even during the year his overall numbers looked weakest. In 1973, his workload jumped again. He threw 228 innings and struck out 153 batters, showing that his stamina had returned fully after the hepatitis illness the year before. That kind of innings total, piled on top of everything he had already thrown as a teenager and a very young starter, added even more mileage to an arm that had barely had time to rest since he first signed with the Reds. Nobody was counting that mileage the way teams count it today. At the time, a durable young pitcher was simply seen as a gift to be used as often as possible. Even as his skills grew sharper, his body kept sending signals that something was wrong. He dealt with a broken thumb, he dealt with neck problems, he dealt with shoulder spasms that came and went without full explanation. Each new issue interrupted his rhythm for a while, and each time he found a way to return and pitch effectively again. That pattern of setback and recovery became almost routine, and routine problems tend to stop looking like warnings. None of these issues on their own looked like a career threat. Together, they were starting to paint a much more troubling picture. Availability, not talent, was becoming the real question mark hanging over his future, even while his talent remained obvious to everyone watching him pitch. For a while, none of that mattered on the field, because Gullett kept delivering when it counted most. In 1973, he went 18-8, closing the season with 9 straight winning decisions. In 1974, he threw 243 innings, struck out 183 batters, and posted a 3.04 ERA. Those are workhorse numbers from a pitcher still only in his early 20s. In 1975, Gullett broke his thumb and missed 2 months of the season. Even with that time lost, he still finished 15-4 with a 2.42 ERA. He placed 5th in National League Cy Young voting that year. In the National League Championship Series against Pittsburgh, he threw a complete game victory. He also hit a home run and a single in that game, driving in 3 runs himself. Then in the World Series against Boston, he won Game 5 in one of the most memorable series in baseball history. In 1976, severe neck and shoulder spasms limited him to only 20 regular season starts. That is a significant drop from a normal workload for a top-of-the-rotation starter. Even with that reduced workload, he went 11-3 with a 3.00 ERA, numbers that most healthy pitchers would be proud to post over a full season. In the postseason, he won Game 1 of the National League Championship Series against the Philadelphia Phillies. He also won Game 1 of the World Series as the Reds swept the Yankees in 4 straight games, capping off one of the most dominant championship runs in baseball history. Stop and consider what those 2 seasons really tell us. In 1975, a broken bone cost him 2 months, and he still turned in one of the best years of his career. In 1976, chronic pain in his neck and shoulder cost him a third of his starts, and he still delivered an ERA under 3 runs a game along with 2 more postseason wins. A pitcher who is truly breaking down does not usually perform at that level. That is exactly what made his situation so hard for anyone to read correctly at the time. His results kept insisting that everything was fine, even as his body kept insisting, quietly, that it was not. Here is the pattern worth sitting with. Every time Gullett's body slowed him down, his results stayed excellent anyway. That combination created a dangerous illusion. Great outcomes made it easy to believe that any physical problem was temporary, minor, or already behind him. Winning kept covering for the damage happening underneath it. Each successful comeback made it a little easier for everyone, including Gullett himself, to trust that his arm could keep absorbing punishment without consequence. influence. After the 1976 championship, Gullett became one of the most valuable players available in baseball's brand new free agent system, a system that had only just been created and was reshaping the entire sport in real time. Teams and players were both learning, in real time, what this new world of player movement actually meant for rosters, budgets, and long-term planning. The Reds had a policy against getting into expensive bidding wars for free agents. Believing they would lose Gullett no matter what they offered, the front office made a major trade instead. They sent Tony Perez and Will McEnany to the Montreal Expos. In return, they received Woody Fryman and Dale Murray. Dan Dreesen was moved toward first base to help fill the roster gaps. Some analysts have argued that trading Tony Perez in particular damaged the chemistry that had made the Big Red Machine so dominant. That claim is an interpretation of what happened, not a proven fact, but it reflects how significant Gullett's coming departure really was to that roster. On November 18, 1976, Gullett signed a 6-year, $2 million contract with the New York Yankees. That was an enormous sum of money for the era, and it came with enormous expectations attached. A quiet farm kid from Greenup County was suddenly one of the highest-paid players in the sport. He walked straight into the environment known as the Bronx Zoo, a clubhouse filled with outsized personalities like Reggie Jackson and an owner in George Steinbrenner who demanded results immediately and publicly. This was a very different world from the close-knit, business-like culture of the Big Red Machine. Rumors began to circulate that Gullett had hurt his shoulder during an off-season appearance on ABC's Superstars competition. Those reports were never confirmed. They remained rumors, but they added an early layer of concern to his new chapter in New York, right at the moment when every eye in the sport was already watching to see if his huge new contract would pay off. Despite any early concerns, Gullett delivered again in 1977. He went 14-4 with a 3.58 ERA. His winning percentage of .778 led the entire American League, an incredible number for any pitcher in any season. The Yankees won the World Series that year, giving Gullett a championship in his very first season wearing pinstripes. On the surface, his move to New York looked like a total success, exactly the kind of debut that justifies a record-breaking contract. Front office executives, fans, and reporters all had good reason to believe the Yankees had made the right investment. Underneath that record, his shoulder was quietly getting worse with every start he made. The same pattern that had followed him through his entire career in Cincinnati was repeating itself in New York, just with higher stakes and a much bigger spotlight watching every pitch. While all of this was happening on the field, Gullett faced an unrelated and unwanted distraction back home. On August 1, 1977, Kentucky State Police raided his 75-acre farm in Greenup County. Officers found about 800 cannabis plants growing on the property. Gullett denied any knowledge of the operation. His brother Jack, who served as caretaker of the farm, was indicted on a trafficking charge. Jack entered a plea of innocent to those charges. Don Gullett himself was never charged with any crime, and he was never legally connected to the operation in any way. Still, the raid landed right in the middle of his first pennant race with the Yankees, adding stress and headlines to an already demanding season. Imagine trying to compete in a hard-fought pennant race in a new city, under a new spotlight, while reporters back home were also asking questions about a police raid on your family's property. That kind of split attention rarely helps an athlete perform at his best, and it certainly does nothing to help an already strained shoulder recover between starts. This section is not about questioning Don's character. It is about recognizing how much pressure and distraction surrounded him at a moment when his body was already under strain, and how little room that left him to focus purely on getting healthy. Now we reach the center of this entire story, the mechanical and medical chain of events that ended Gullett's career. This is the part of his story that explains, more clearly than any single injury report, how a talent this large could disappear this quickly. In his instructional book, Tom Seaver, a Hall of Fame pitcher and former teammate, broke down exactly what was wrong with Gullett's delivery. Seaver was uniquely qualified to make this observation. He was not a doctor or a trainer, but he was one of the most technically minded pitchers of his generation, someone who studied mechanics as carefully as any coach in the sport. Seaver explained that Gullett threw with a cross-body motion. Instead of stepping directly toward home plate, he stepped across his own body. That kind of motion forces the upper body to twist much harder than a straighter delivery would require. Over years of throwing that way, that extra twisting placed unusual and repeated force directly on his left shoulder. The result was scar tissue building up inside the joint and a steady loss of normal movement. By the spring of 1978, the damage had become impossible to ignore. Gullett missed all of April and May. At that time, major shoulder surgery was viewed as an extremely risky option, one that could easily end a pitcher's career rather than save it. Doctors and teams often searched for less invasive answers first, hoping to avoid the operating table if there was any other way forward. Yankees physician Dr. Maurice Cowan decided to try a procedure called shoulder manipulation instead of surgery. It was meant to be a middle path, something less drastic than opening up the joint, but strong enough to restore the movement Gullett had lost. Here is what that procedure involved, described in plain terms. Gullett was placed under general anesthesia. While he was unconscious, his muscles could not tighten up or resist movement the way they normally would to protect the joint. That protective reflex exists for a reason. It stops a joint from being pushed further than it can safely handle. With that natural protection removed, his arm was forcefully stretched and moved. The goal was to physically tear apart the scar tissue that had built up and was blocking his motion, restoring the range of motion a pitcher needs to throw at a high level. This same approach had been tried on another pitcher, Catfish Hunter, and it appeared to help him for a stretch of the 1978 season. Hunter went 10-3 down the stretch that year after his own manipulation procedure, and that success likely gave the Yankees medical staff more confidence that the same approach could work for Gullett. Every treatment decision in medicine involves looking at what has worked before. In this case, one earlier success story helped shape a decision that would carry enormous consequences for a second pitcher's career. For a short time, it seemed to work for Gullett too. He returned to the mound on June 4, 1978, and pitched well in several starts, giving his team and himself real reason for hope. But there is a difficult uncertainty at the heart of this part of the story. His shoulder may already have contained serious structural damage before the manipulation ever took place. It is possible that the forceful stretching made existing tears worse instead of only clearing away scar tissue. It is also possible the procedure genuinely helped for a while, only for the underlying damage to catch up with him regardless. The available research does not prove that the manipulation alone caused his final injury, and it would not be fair to state that as settled fact. What we do know is that his return did not last, and the weeks that followed brought the most painful chapter of his entire career. On July 9, 1978, Gullett was scheduled to pitch against the Milwaukee Brewers. During his warm-ups, he felt something strange in his shoulder. He made the choice to pitch anyway. He lasted only 2/3 of an inning. He allowed 4 earned runs on 3 hits, and he walked 4 batters. That outing turned out to be his final appearance in a major league game. A second attempt at shoulder manipulation afterward did not work. Testing eventually revealed a double tear in his rotator cuff, with damage found in both the front and back regions of the joint. It was a complete structural failure of the shoulder that had carried him through 9 remarkable seasons. Look at the full chain of decisions that led to this moment. A cross-body motion created constant strain for years, quietly wearing down tissue that never fully had time to heal. Warning signs like neck spasms and shoulder pain kept appearing and kept getting managed rather than fully addressed, because managing them worked well enough, right up until it did not. A forceful procedure was used on a shoulder that may have already been seriously torn, in an era when doctors had far fewer tools to look inside a joint before deciding how to treat it. And in the middle of a warm-up session, with a strange and unfamiliar feeling running through his arm, Gullett made the very human choice to pitch through it one more time, the same choice that had worked for him so many times before. None of this means any single person acted with bad intentions. Dr. Cowan and the Yankees were working within the medical understanding of their era, doing what they believed gave their pitcher the best chance to keep playing the game he loved. But the pattern here is impossible to ignore, and it explains exactly how a Hall of Fame level talent lost his career so suddenly, and so much sooner than anyone around him expected. On September 29, 1978, Gullett underwent open surgery to repair the torn rotator cuff. He stayed on the Yankees roster through their World Series championship that fall, but he could not take part in any of it. In the spring of 1979, he completed a 15-minute workout that was treated like major news. The New York Times ran a positive story about his progress. For a brief moment, hope returned. There is something genuinely painful about that 15-minute workout making national headlines. It shows just how badly everyone wanted this story to end differently. A team, a city, and a pitcher were all hoping that one modest workout meant the worst was over. That kind of hope is understandable. Gullett had spent his entire career overcoming setbacks and returning stronger. There was no obvious reason, in the moment, to believe this setback would be any different from the ones that came before it. That hope did not hold up. His fastball, which had once flown past 95 miles per hour, a pitch that made hitters look overmatched for nearly a decade, now sat around 80 miles per hour, closer to an average changeup than an elite fastball. In 1980, Gullett tried something drastic. He attempted to throw with a submarine-style delivery, hoping a completely different arm angle might reduce the strain on his shoulder and give his career one more chance. It did not work. He could not even get through a basic bullpen session without intense pain. On October 30th, 1980, the Yankees released him. His contract contract guaranteed his salary through 1982, so the team continued paying him under that agreement, later recovering part of that cost through insurance covering disabled players. It matters to get the timeline exactly right here. Gullett's last major league game came at age 27. His official release from the Yankees came 2 years later, at age 29. Those are two different milestones, and mixing them up misses an important part of the story. His body gave out at 27. The business side of his career did not fully close until later. His final career totals stand as proof of exactly how good he really was. He finished with a record of 109 wins and 50 losses. His ERA sat at 3.11. He struck out 921 batters. His winning percentage of .686 ranks second only to Whitey Ford among modern left-handed pitchers with at least 100 career wins. Ranking second on a list like that, ahead of countless other talented left-handers across the entire modern era of baseball, is an extraordinary achievement on its own. It becomes even more extraordinary when you remember that he built that ranking in barely 9 major league seasons, most of them shortened in some way by injury or illness. Those numbers came from a career that lasted less than a decade. Imagine what the full total might have looked like if his shoulder had survived the pressure his delivery placed on it year after year. It is impossible to know for certain, but the pace he set in his 20s makes it easy to understand why Sparky Anderson once believed 250 wins was a realistic target, but his health problems were far from finished. His lifestyle after retirement became more sedentary, a sharp change from a career built on constant physical activity. He reportedly smoked up to 3 packs of cigarettes a day and drank large amounts of coffee, habits that put serious strain on his heart over time. In 1986, at only 35 years old, an age when most people are not thinking about heart disease at all, he suffered a massive heart attack. He spent a month in critical condition in the hospital, fighting for his life just a few years after his pitching career had ended. After that terrifying experience, he quit smoking for good. His heart trouble was not finished with him yet. In 1990, during spring training with a minor league team, he suffered a second heart attack. That led to emergency triple bypass surgery at the Cleveland Clinic in June of that year, a serious operation that rerouted blood flow around blocked arteries near his heart. Twice in a matter of years, Gullett had come close to losing his life to heart disease. On top of everything his shoulder had already taken from him, his body had now failed him in 2 completely different ways, first through his shoulder and later through his heart. Even through all of that, he found his way back to the game he loved. In December of 1989, the Reds hired him to coach pitching for their Double-A team in Chattanooga, giving him a way back into baseball after years away from any team. In 1991, he coached at the Triple-A level in Nashville, one more step up the ladder toward the majors. On May 24, 1993, he returned to the major leagues as the Cincinnati Reds pitching coach. He held that role for more than 12 seasons, working directly with the next generation of Reds pitchers and passing along everything he had learned from his own career, including the hard lessons that career had taught him about protecting a young arm. His run as pitching coach ended on June 21, 2005. The team dismissed him along with manager Dave Miley. The Reds had started that season poorly, and the front office was moving the organization toward younger players. Vern Rule took over the pitching coach role after him. It would be unfair to treat this dismissal as proof that Gullett had failed as a coach. 12 years in one coaching role, working with dozens of different pitchers across more than a decade of Major League Baseball, speaks for itself. Front offices change direction for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of any one coach's work, and a poor start to a season is often the trigger for exactly that kind of larger shakeup. The decision was tied to the team's larger direction, not to any specific mistake on his part. He continued working in the organization's player development system after that, staying connected to the game and the franchise that had drafted him more than 3 decades earlier. In 2002, the Cincinnati Reds inducted Don Gullett into their Team Hall of Fame, an honor separate from the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, but a meaningful recognition all the same, honoring everything he had accomplished in a Reds uniform across his playing career and his years as pitching coach. It was a fitting way to recognize a player whose entire baseball life, from his rookie debut to his final season on the coaching staff, had been so closely tied to that one organization. He died on February 14, 2024, at the age of 73. The cause was heart failure, tied to natural causes, closing out a life that had already survived 2 earlier heart attacks decades before. He was survived by his wife Kathy, the same high school sweetheart who had stayed behind in Kentucky all those years earlier while he chased his dream to spring training, and his children, Donald Jr., Tracy, and Angie, along with his grandchildren. He was laid to rest at Mount Zion Cemetery in South Shore, Kentucky, not far from the fields where he first learned to throw a baseball. baseball, and the Kentucky Senate passed a formal resolution honoring his life and career. Don Gullett reached the very top of professional baseball. He won 3 World Series titles, one with the Reds in 1975, one with the Reds in 1976, and one with the Yankees in 1977, a run of consecutive championships that very few players in the history of the sport have ever matched. He beat some of the greatest left-handed pitchers in history to the 91 win mark at age 25, standing ahead of Warren Spahn, Whitey Ford, and Sandy Koufax at that same point in their own careers. He later spent years helping shape a new generation of Reds pitchers as their coach, passing on a lifetime of hard-earned lessons to players who never had to learn them the same painful way he did. The future that people once predicted for him, a long Hall of Fame career stretching into his mid-30s, never arrived. His shoulder gave out before his talent ever did. But what he did accomplish, in a career cut short at 27, still stands as one of the most remarkable and painful stories in the history of the game. A reminder of just how much even the most gifted athletes can lose, and just how much they can still leave behind.